everyone. I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. And on today's program, we have a really interesting subject with really interesting people. The bar just got high. Did you notice that?
Okay.
Let me introduce them. And I'm going to read these introductions because this is about technology. And sure enough, I'm going to mess something up because I'm 70 years old and this is not my bailiwick, but it's really important. So on the far end, I know this guy. Michael Walker is a owner and developer of Moondust Studios. But in his day job, he is the Director of Technological Development at Community Resource Network, the organization that I help lead. And he has helped globally people in different countries set up IT systems. And so we appreciate him being here. In our lovely middle, we have Danya, goes by Shay Glennie. Now listen to this. This is so, we were talking beforehand. She said, one of the things she does is systematizes empathy. Is that the greatest phrase you've ever heard in your life? Oh my goodness. But her actual, she's a co-founder of Favor Works and is a community builder and marketing technologist who stays on top of the trends. That's why we wanted her here. And to my immediate left, my good friend Sean Romano, who is the creative director of Signal Brand Makers. And I knew I should have. I'm trying
to. It's a good name. Maybe I should switch.
Brand Masters.
Powerful, yeah.
It is very powerful. You need a sword with that one, though. But he's also been, just full disclosure, the chief architectural architect for communications at Hunter Vision. I made that title up.
Yeah, that's good too, man. That's good.
That's a good title.
I gotta come to you.
Yeah, Hunter Vision. So yeah, because I'm a brand master.
Come on in, man.
Anyhow, and he helps send messages both to the mind and the heart that fit the mission of the organizations that he helps. Hey, I've been waiting for this because I'm so curious to learn more about something I know practically nothing about, and that is the impact that technology is having on our culture and how we can best navigate that, kind of mitigating the unintentional collateral damage and maximizing the advantages of being technologically capable. So, having said that, let me start with you, Sean. We've had centuries of having our brains formed around print communication. You know, post Gutenberg, and a couple of decades where now we've created neural pathways that just have to have immediate response, and when it does, we get a little deposit of endorphins in our brain that says, "Boy, that was fun! I got a message. Right. Oh boy, I got a message." You know, how is that impacting us, especially? Is it different with adults and kids? I mean, what's
Well, you're right.
Talk about
you're
that
right about you say endorphins, and that's part of it. I've heard dopamine is like a big part of it. So, we have a natural reward cycle in our body that kind of gets hijacked a little bit by technology if we're not careful. I heard about a study that actually looked at the brains of video gamers and found that the reward they get from accomplishing something in a virtual world is the same as if they were to accomplish that thing in real life. Your brain doesn't know the difference. So I think kids are especially susceptible because they don't understand what's going on with this stuff. And I think it has to do with being, you can be aware of it even, that helps, right? But I do think that, we're not ready. Like you said, it's only been 2 decades, and we haven't biologically even been able to. We don't even understand the things that are happening. Let alone know how to address them. I think we're getting there. But I have 2 kids, and so I think a lot about that stuff. I think a lot about it.
So what would be? Let me stick with you just for a second here. Is there a rule of thumb for parents when as to how much I see, because my kid would stay on a video game all day long, you know, and so is there a rule of thumb? or do parents participate with the kids? Or I mean,
That's a great, yeah. The participation part is actually a big deal. So I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Art of Screen Time, and it's all about. So she's a technologist, writer, researcher. She did a lot of writing and education. I can't remember her last name, but it's called The Art of Screen Time. And she wanted to look at what does the research really say as opposed to what the, because bad news travels fast, right? So, anecdotal evidence / kind of buzzworthy headlines, right? Those aren't maybe the best ways to get our info. What she said was, if you think about media and screen time a lot like diet, you can have an unhealthy thing every once in a while, but the point is it's better to eat together with people, right? And foster community. It's the same thing with screens. Just like you should find out what they love. Use that as a gateway, but use it together more often than they would use it by themselves. And that is a great way to bond over that and build, for instance, like FaceTime, right?
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of how technology has completely, it's closed the distance globally.
Yeah.
And I love it. I have my parents are not nearby, and so my kids use it with them. And I mean, it's phenomenal to think that we can do that.
Let me take off on that because this is a more of a positive note. Shay, I got to know what systematizing empathy is. This is just but it's that very phrase bespeaks of a potential capability of increasing something good.
That's right.
By technology.
That's right.
Talk about that for a minute, will you?
Absolutely. So I think that we have a little bit of ambiguity sometimes around empathy. So to just kind of clear some things up around empathy, it is absolutely teachable. It's learnable, right? And therefore it's systematizable. So I think we think of it sometimes as an inherent trait. It's not just an inherent trait. It can be learned at any age and any stage. The other thing with empathy, I think, is we have a misperception that it is me understanding what your perspective is and your experience is, and therefore doing what you want me to do. And it's not that either. That's something else. So if we think about empathy as perspective taking, and then applying that perspective taking to our decision making frameworks, well, then we can look at empathy and technology and say, oh, I can leverage empathy to humanize my applications of technology, to bridge the gaps between humans, right, and make the world a better place through technology. It becomes a vehicle.
Yeah.
That really begs another question.
Okay.
When we talk about humanizing technology, all kinds of, AI is going to take over the world, and there are going to be robots that look like us, and I saw the Will Smith movie, and or whatever the other movies where robots actually do look like. So, Michael, what do we need to be afraid of, and what do we not need to be afraid of?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, there's kind of this Hollywoodization of these big, alien type things that would have occurred with technology that are just these massive monumental things, when I think in reality, a lot of the change is subtle. The fact that in the past 10 years or so, we've actually seen depression grow in adolescents by a factor of about 30 to 40% because just them being on their screens, as Sean was kind of already talking about. So there's these subtle, there's the old analogy of if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water, it'll jump right out. But if it's sitting in water and it slowly boils, it'll stay in there until it dies, type of thing. And that sounds very negative, but the positive is that these tools can add to our productivity. They can connect us. We have these tools like FaceTime, which are awesome. But instead of worrying about the big AI type of revolutions that may or may not occur, we kind of have to worry more about what happens in our family. I can't change what someone at Google is doing in their research. However, I can change how I interact with my family, and I can be courteous to my coworkers. I can.
I like that. I really like that. I'm of the personality that tends to get caught. My wife will say to me, "Why are you watching, X TED Talk, whatever that thing, And I tend to get caught in kind of worst case scenarios. That's sort of my thing. So I love that you said, I want to leverage my locus of influence in my world, instead of getting freaked out by this stuff. Although if you talk to me about AI, I have some thoughts on that. I mean, I watched a TED Talk from his name's Sam Harris. He's a philosopher and a researcher. I can't think of the other word I was looking for, but he's painted an interesting picture and basically says that whether or not AI becomes sort of sinister in some way, we're actually we're really fascinated by it, and we don't even have the emotional reserve or capacity to even understand what the implications are of it. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Which is why I think we have to be so intentional when we are innovating. So progress for progress' sake can be, I think, really scary, and it can be devastating in some situations. So if we are saying there is a need or a want in the world that I want to solve, right? There's a problem or an impact I want to have. And so I start with the humans, right, and what they need, and then reverse engineer what kinds of technology I need to develop to improve the human experience. Well, then I think we end up in an AI situation that is beneficial and pleasant.
I hope so.
Can you give an example of that, Shay? Are there technologies that have been developed that have really helped? Obviously, FaceTime is one, but it helped relationships build or helped solve actually human problems that made people more feeling or more empathetic or more human or can you speak that?
Absolutely. I think the easiest example is probably these intentionally developed online communities. So before the digital age, right, we were in this kind of industrial age-ish, and human behavior was very disconnected. We were very isolated from each other. And the digital age, actually, research has shown, has brought about this anthropological shift back to our kind of farming days and community days. So while we can have children who lose themselves online and they're not interacting with real people in the brick and mortar world, we also have people who are using these platforms, these intentional conscious communities online to build human connection and go back to our storytelling days, right, where we had this back and forth dialogue constantly and we learned through story with each other.
That's, Michael, you've been in different countries helping them set up their systems of communication. Is there any difference internationally between those kinds of populations and what's happening in the U.S. right now?
There definitely can be, and a lot of it is cultural based. So that can be very nuanced. But in many of the cases, like I go to Ukraine very often, and there's a kind of a few-year lag, I would say, in technology. And now they might have Facebook, for example, but fewer people have smartphones or something to that effect. So the usage is almost how it was in America a few years ago. So it's fascinating to watch more so the trends that happen with that. People are still much more inclined to meet people in a market, for example. They will go to a friend before they do that. It's kind of the relationship first, technology second. Whereas I would say in the Western world, in many cases, not all the time, but technology first, then relationships. People will spend so much time creating an online portfolio or persona, if you will, that may be completely different from their real world. They can always look very happy and stuff like that on Instagram, where in real life they may be struggling and you would never know if you did not have that first interaction with them. So I do see in other countries where people are more inclined to email or phone or send a message or call and actually have a one-to-one conversation instead of more of that news feed,
that's interesting.
Story.
When I was growing up, I watched Groucho Marx sometime, and they'd wait for this particular word that they'd chosen ahead of time, and if somebody said it, the duck would drop down, and you just said that word Facebook. Let's talk for a moment. I told you I wasn't going to go here. Now I'm going to go here. Okay. But it brings up the issue: how much of your own information should you trust to the online community? Are there ways that not just that you can guard your information or you can increase the security of your privacy, but are there things that you're tempted to share because you have the impression you're talking with a person, but you're talking with a whole lot of people, Right. Can we talk about that just for a minute? Because this is, so what should people understand about if I'm going to be online and if this is a social media opportunity for me? There's probably some reasonable precautions I should take.
I think about online activity as walking out into the town square, right? So if you're comfortable walking out in the town square where anybody and everybody is passing through and anybody and everybody can hear and see what you're doing and who you're doing it with, then it belongs on social media. If you wouldn't do it in the town square, you probably shouldn't do it on social media.
That's good. That's a good rule of thumb. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen, again, with relationships where if there's a moment where you need to have a conversation with others that, again, you might not want shared, have that one-on-one, or either in person or by phone or however. But once you put it through email or something like that, there is now a digital archive of that that could be shared, and out of context, there can cause all sort of ramifications. And we've seen that in various different realms that's occurred.
Yeah.
So I've always been taught, if you send in an email, assume that the whole world can see it.
Right.
And that kind of changes just some of the tone that you put in there. Or if you say something that might need some pre-context, that you describe things in full detail, so that if someone that may not know, a mannerism between you and a coworker or a friend, you are kind of describing that so that someone that has no clue about either person on the other side, they can kind of interpret that properly.
That's a good point about private messaging apps too. We feel like it's private, so it's one-on-one, so this is not an email, conversation or a public social media conversation. But with the way that advertisers and marketers are gleaning data, you really do want to be careful about the things you're having conversations with when it's not face-to-face.
Yeah. All three of you have a role in the marketplace to help organizations communicate their particular personality or what they offer. And I want to talk for a moment about how important it is if you're in some sort of, the old term was public relations, but this is much more precise and much more targeted. You brought up what advertisers can glean and the kind of information that they're looking for, personal information and perspectives. But how do you, and I think this would help our listening audience, how do you listen for the personality of an organization so that you can mirror that accurately, or help them come up with words or images or brands in a way that says, yeah, I really know who that is when you hear it, or that really is me when you say it. How do you do that?
Did you want to kick this one off?
Well, you got to ask the right questions. That's part of it. You have to kind of read between the lines. Usually people don't always say what they mean. They don't even know. Like, it's funny. Was it Simon Sinek who talked about the disconnect between our emotions and our verbal centers in our brain? We don't actually have the capacity to express what we feel, and so there's this dark art, this nuance of like gleaning and pulling and teasing out the deep kind of why behind the words that people are using. And I don't know. I don't have. There's not a formula for that. It's a lot of listening and a lot of question asking. That's going to be my answer.
It starts with the humans, right? So in any organization, it's going to be an expression of the humans that are leading and guiding the organization or who founded it. So some very intentional time with those leaders, extracting their DNA and making sure that that's in a communicable form, right? That can then be expressed through words and images and logos and things like that. It really starts with the humans. So extracting that DNA of the humans in the organization.
And it's about feeling. It's about, at the end of the day, people are drawn to what resonates emotionally. I think that's why what you're doing is so interesting, because it's all about what resonates with people.
And then companies have such a hard time wondering, is email dead? Should I be on Facebook or Snapchat? Or, what about my website? And those are all downstream conversations. Because once we really know who the people are and what impact the organization is there to achieve, then the technology decisions become kind of easy, right? Then they fall into simple buckets. But when we address the technology use questions first, and we haven't really articulated this up here, it's difficult.
I'm thinking of this is such a great conversation, because if we could help people, I'm thinking of your kids. I love your kids.
Sure. I love them too.
Beautiful kids. Beautiful kids. And my grandchildren, and part of the job of a parent or a grandparent is to help a child communicate in a productive way, what they're feeling or what they want. And the same thing is true of organizations. Maybe we could say it like this, and maybe we could say, and a lot of times you have to guess. But I'm just thinking of what a better world we could build if we could help those we're listening to express more accurately. It's kind of like probably what a therapist does, although I don't know what a therapist does. But it probably, this is what I'm hearing you, try to express or whatever. And so, but it's the whole idea of, again, empathy. I want to feel what you feel. I want to see things from your perspective, not for the purpose of manipulating you, but for the purpose of clarifying,
That's right.
what we're really talking about
That's
here.
right. And helping to find context. Sorry to interrupt. Helping to find context. So it's great to know you and all the multi-prismatic fascination that you are as a human, but how does that apply to our viewers, right? How does that apply to each of us as guests? How does it apply to your wife and your children? A little bit different context of expressing yourself. So I think context is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and with that, is so much of everything we've talked about at the start of this conversation about, the millennia that humans have existed, 80% of our communication was body language and emotions and things like that.
Yeah.
And now when you're digitizing it, in video you can pull a little bit of that, but through text and other forms of that, whatever the carrier is, you are losing 80% of that. And again, that's where it's become so important, especially with empathy. Like, if someone says, I lost a loved one, where are you? I don't know what that means. But if I see you say, I lost a loved one, or I lost a loved one, but man, I'm going to react to them in two totally different ways
that's right.
based on the way that I can love on them, knowing them as my friend. But online, you just see one sentence, and out of context, again, I don't know how to respond to that sometimes.
Yeah.
That is very challenging. And we're seeing those social networks of different types all trying to embrace different ways to do that, of how to try to convey some more of that empathy like you've been talking about.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think what Sean said about asking the right question, I think people are afraid to ask more questions or more details when that's exactly what we need in order to identify more precisely how to respond. I'm reading a book. I'm reading a lot of Phil Cook stuff right now, and he's a guy that is a branding guy, but he acts in the world of religion, especially concerned with evangelicalism as I am. But he said, when an Indian used to send up smoke signals, there were no emotions, there were no adjectives, there were just, all you had was some look out, or some big messages, some alerts, and he says really the art of communications is trying to identify the details of what's trying to be communicated. And so if anything comes from a conversation like this, it's probably the permission or even the demand to use what media we have to learn more about the other person. And not to be afraid to follow up with questions, and to try to gain understanding that's a hard understanding as well as a head understanding. Last question. As people are dealing both with their own tendency to pay more attention to the device in their hand and the person across from them, because I just got a message, and dopamine releases are exactly what you're talking about, because they're addictive. It's physiologically addictive. What are some practical helps for people who will admit to themselves, I'm paying more attention to this at the cost of actually talking to somebody or forming a relationship. This is especially dangerous for an introvert like I am. I'm much more comfortable with just information, and talking one-on-one kind of makes my eye twitch. And so what are some helpful ways that you would tell people, here's how to be released from captivity?
You got to know yourself really well too. Like, you can't make blanket rules for anyone. You have to know your tendencies and then be really just honest with yourself. I think not using, for me, I'm not going to use technology. Try not to use it before bed. I don't go to the restroom with it. Some people do that. Like, I just said, hey, I'm not great with driving yet. I'll be honest. Like I'm that's a problem. So for me, I just knowing myself, setting those boundaries, and that's how I'm approaching it right now.
Yeah, for me, a lot of it is the fact of interruption is kind of what you were talking about. Everything is trying to vie for our time, and in many cases, the reason is that advertising dollars are many of these different apps' source of revenue. So their goal is as much time as you're in my app as possible is the more money that I make.
Right.
So we almost have to like have a non-technology side of it where we approach it by saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I, for example, will answer my emails once per hour or so, and I know a lot of people that'll do that, and they just kind of make a reminder for themselves where at the top of the hour, then I'll go look at my Slack, my email, my text, and instead of me constantly responding in the moment, I almost pause that. My phone is almost perpetually on vibrate and DND.
Yes.
And if there's an emergency, someone can call me twice, and DND will let them through. It's so subtle, but if my father needs to call me and he calls me a second time, he knows that he'll get through. And if it does go, do not disturb.
Do not disturb.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize.
From yours.
But it's so great because if I'm in, and I've had times where I've been in a meeting, and if my phone vibrates, now I know it's important, and then I don't feel like it's rude to the other group to be like, I'm sorry, I do need to step out for a moment, because I know that it's not just a frivolous message.
So to that effect, I have 2 kids, and if they're with the sitter or I'm not home, I want to know if they need to get me. I use D&D as well, but also wearables, right? So like our watches, the bracelets, the necklaces, sometimes that gives us a little bit of comfort to just get the phone out of our hands, leave it in the bag, leave it in the desk, and not worry that we're going to miss something that might be emergency or critical.
You guys are awesome. I've learned a lot today, so thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just have a moment with you because we're out of time. I hate it because I could talk about this a long time and learn a whole lot more from Sean and Shay and Michael, and I want to thank you for coming on. But technology is about connection and not isolation. I mean, obviously there are things that we want to learn, and that takes some alone time sometimes. But we were made for relationships, and technology can either increase the connection or decrease the connection. And so I just want to leave you with that admonition. When it talks about we're being made to love others, you can do that with technology, but you've got to be alert to when it's not helpful. So thank you for being here and for joining us on Power Talks. Remember, these discussions are just that. They're discussions among us. We'd love to see you continue the discussions at home or go one step further, get involved. Because when Power Talks, you are empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.